Good afternoon. My name is Christoph Meixliu and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist working at the PM Blue Mountains Local Health District. And I've been working with elements of open dialogue in my team, and I look forward to the opportunity to address the ideas more directly with the St. Vincent's Open Dialogue initiative. I guess I'd like to start with some observations as an outsider of what families experience when a family member develops significant psychological symptoms. Patients and families can experience intense pressure, confusion, guilt, and shame. When something goes wrong, we often want to know who or what is responsible, and family members can end up blaming each other or, more commonly, themselves. There is often a feeling of being unsure about what to do next and being responsible for making the right decision. Patients and their families can become disconnected from their support networks, either by cutting off contact or not really talking about the things that matter to them. Just the idea of seeking help can bring on feelings of worry, shame, and fear. In the midst of so much stress, it can be difficult to find the space and time to try to make sense of what's going on, to understand where each person is coming from, and to tolerate not having a clear and unequivocal explanation for what's happening. As a doctor, I find this hard, and I imagine that as a person living through this experience, it's even more challenging. Open dialogue introduces a set of principles that aim ultimately to create a safe enough space for a long enough time to talk through and better understand this mess of feelings, thoughts, judgments, and experiences. It tries to achieve this by opening things up rather than by closing things down, by being prepared to say, "I'm not sure," instead of "this explains your problem." Open dialogue sees this as key to the healing process. The developers of open dialogue in Finland identified 7 principles that guided their work. The fact that these are principles rather than prescriptions, I think, allows them to be adapted to different contexts and settings. I'll briefly describe each and comment on each principle. And as you listen to them, you may start to notice that there are connections between each of the principles. The first principle is immediate help. This refers to responding to an initial referral promptly, say within 24 hours of receiving a phone call. Usually this response is to organise a network meeting. The Chinese word for crisis combines the words danger and opportunity. And I think open dialogue sees crisis, when things seem at their worst, as an opportunity for services to work with patients and families when perhaps they're most open to this idea. Working together here focuses on starting a meaningful conversation that is scaffolded by intensive support, rather than necessarily going in and telling people what they must do. The second principle encompasses flexibility and mobility. This is about being flexible enough to adapt to the needs and priorities of the patient and family, meeting them where they're at, and also about being able to meet them geographically where they're at. For example, having the first meeting in the family home rather than in the clinic room can help the family feel and be more comfortable and confident. I guess literally feel more at home. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of going to the doctors and feeling like you should talk about what the doctor needs to hear rather than about what is most on your mind. I think this principle of flexibility and mobility aims to create a safe enough experience for patients and families to talk about what is foremost on their minds, as well as what clinicians may need to discuss. Principle 3, teamwork and responsibility, describes how the team is responsible for supporting the family while they're receiving care. The person who receives the initial phone call does not delegate to a colleague, but is responsible for arranging the first network meeting. At that network meeting, a team of about 3 people from different disciplines and different treatment settings, say from hospital and a community team, is formed. And this team remains with the patient and family for the duration of the episode of care. This principle helps to create an experience of stability and consistency that allows the family to feel safe. It's also protective for clinicians, relieving them of the burden of feeling completely and solely responsible for the family. And it ensures that different perspectives are always kept in mind. In my experience, hospital wards and community outpatient clinics both tend to have very high and often unrealistic expectations of what can be achieved in the other setting. This approach to teamwork and responsibility, I think, helps keep those expectations real. Psychological continuity is the fifth principle of open dialogue. It tries to get around the problem of having to tell the same story to many people. The team that is formed in the first network meeting remains continuously involved with the family for as long as is needed. And the social network is kept in the loop, regardless of what therapy is being offered. That is, they don't suddenly become irrelevant just because the patient is receiving a course of individual therapy. This principle is important, I think, because it keeps a balance between not getting caught up with only one person's particular view and understanding of a problem, and not letting things get so out of hand that chaos reigns and thinking and reflection get shut down. The sixth principle is tolerance of uncertainty. When you provide a sufficient environment of trust and safety, people can talk with and respond to each other without having to worry about whether what they're saying is right or correct. If we are going to try to understand what is happening in this patient, in this family, it's important that we proceed slowly, that we do not jump prematurely to conclusions and make decisions that end up silencing a particular person. Tolerance of uncertainty is a bit of an antidote to this tendency to blame, and also gives people time to think about what they can do or contribute. It allows difficult conversations to take place with more safety. Some practices, like meetings at home, daily meetings during a crisis, or having a team approach, can help build up a sense of trust that allows patient, family, and clinical team to tolerate uncertainty. This principle may not stop me from pulling out my script pad, but it will help me avoid pulling it out as the first thing I do. And it may give everyone time to think about what else is going on, regardless of whether medication is indicated. At the same time, this principle can present particular challenges to some clinicians who genuinely want to help by coming up with the solutions that coming up with solutions to patients and families' problems. And it can also present challenges to some patients and families who may have come to expect this of their clinicians. The final principle is dialogism. Dialogism refers to a way of communicating that allows space for all voices to be heard. It is a communication that is present, that is in the here and now, curious, open, and acknowledges that there is always more beneath the words that we say. It draws on an assumption that through genuine listening and responding, understanding becomes richer and change becomes more possible. Think about when the opposite occurs, not being responded to, not being heard. This can be painful and destructive for all of us. The idea of dialogism invites us to understand a symptom, no matter how bizarre, as a communication about something that is profound and distressing, an utterance inviting a response. It cautions us not to stop at describing the symptom in terms of a possible diagnosis. It asks us to tolerate uncertainty, but in an environment of safety and trust, so that we are able to wonder about what is being communicated in a particular dialogue and how we might arrive at a shared understanding of what is going on. Dialogism is simple enough an idea, listen and respond, but as an ideal, it's not always easy to live up to. And so you have a brief summary of the 7 principles of open dialogue and some thoughts about how they might begin to address the problem of talking about problems that affect real people, that provoke fear, blame and shame, and where there is no one simple and straightforward way of understanding what is going on. Thank you.